What if Harry Potter was sentenced to Azkaban? The verdict was unanimous. 50 members of the Wizengamots sat in their plum-coloured robes in the circular courtroom beneath the Ministry of Magic, and 50 hands rose when Cornelius Fudge asked for the vote, and the sound that followed was not gasps or protest or the murmur of dissent. It was the thick, smothering silence of a room full of people who know they are doing something wrong and have decided to do it anyway. Harry Potter stood in the centre of the room, chained to the chair. The chains had been unnecessary. He was 15 years old and wandless. His holly wand snapped in half on the evidence table beside the court stenographer, but the chains and the Wizengamot loved tradition the way drowning men love driftwood. Desperately, without examination. Because the alternative was admitting that the sea was real and they were sinking. Harry James Potter, Fudge said, and his voice carried the particular quality of a man who has rehearsed this moment in his bathroom mirror. You have been found guilty of the use of underage magic in the presence of a muggle, in violation of the decree for the reasonable restriction of underage sorcery and of reckless endangerment of the International Statute of Secrecy. You are hereby sentenced to 2 years in Azkaban prison. The courtroom remained silent. Harry did not speak. He sat in the chair with his wrists bleeding where the chains had bitten too tight and his glasses slightly askew, and his face was the thing that the reporters in the gallery would remember. The thing that Rita Skeeter would describe in tomorrow's Prophet with a mixture of accuracy and embellishment that was her particular brand of poison. His face was not afraid. It was betrayed, not the operatic betrayal of someone who has been stabbed in the back and wants the audience to know it. The quiet, devastating, nearly invisible betrayal of someone who trusted the system and has just discovered that the system was never designed to protect him. The betrayal of a boy who grew up in a cupboard under the stairs, believing that the magical world would be different, that it would be fair, that it would look at him and see him, not the scar, not the name, not the political inconvenience, and who was sitting in chains at the age of 15 learning that the magical world was not different at all. It was just louder. Dumbledore stood. The gallery held its breath. "Minister," Dumbledore said, and his voice was calm, which was worse than anger, because Albus Dumbledore's calm was the calm of a man who has seen civilizations rise and fall and who knows that what is happening in this room is the beginning of a fall. "I must formally protest this verdict." The boy used a Patronus charm to defend himself and his cousin from Dementors. Dementors that were dispatched, as I believe the evidence clearly shows, by the ministry itself. "That accusation has not been substantiated," Fudge said, "because you will not allow the evidence to be examined. The Wizengamot has reached its verdict. The matter is closed." "The matter," Dumbledore said, "is very far," but the chains held. And the verdict stood, and Harry Potter, the boy who lived, the child who had survived the killing curse at the age of 1 and faced Voldemort at 11 and 12 and 14, was led from the courtroom by 2 aurors who would not meet his eyes, through the corridors of the Ministry of Magic, to a holding cell where he would spend the night before being transported to a fortress in the middle of the North Sea. He was 15 years old. He had saved his cousin's life. And the Ministry of Magic had sentenced him to Azkaban for it. The news broke at Hogwarts the following morning. It arrived in the Great Hall during breakfast, carried by 100 owls bearing the morning edition of the Daily Prophet, which landed on 100 tables and was opened by 100 students who read the headline and went very, very quiet. "Boy who lived sentenced to Azkaban underage magic conviction sends Potter to prison. Ron Weasley was sitting at the Gryffindor table. He was eating toast. He had been eating toast for approximately 3 seconds when the paper landed in front of him, and the 3 seconds of toast eating that followed the landing of the paper were the last 3 seconds of Ron Weasley's childhood. Because what happened after the reading of the headline, the processing of its meaning, the slow, terrible understanding that his best friend was going to prison, ended something in Ron that would take years to fully repair. He stood. The toast fell. The bench scraped. No, he said. Hermione was beside him. She had received the paper at the same moment and had read it faster, because Hermione read everything faster, and her face was already doing the thing it did when her mind was working at full speed, the rapid cycling through emotions that other people experience sequentially, but Hermione experienced simultaneously: shock, anger, analysis, determination. This is wrong, Hermione said. This is legally wrong. The decree for the reasonable restriction allows for magic used in self-defense. There are precedents, dozens of them. The 1847 ruling in Mugwump v. Kettleburn explicitly, Hermione, established that defensive magic in the presence of a Muggle family member constitutes reasonable application of the exception clause, and the 1923 amendment to the Statute of Secrecy, specifically Hermione. He stopped, looked at Ron. His face was white. His freckles stood out like constellations against snow. He's going to Azkaban, Ron said. Harry is going to Azkaban. The Great Hall was listening. Every student, every table, every house. The professors at the staff table were reading their own copies of the Prophet. McGonagall's lips had compressed into a line so thin they had essentially ceased to exist. Flitwick had dropped his juice. Hagrid, at the end of the table, was crying large, messy, ungovernable tears that splashed onto the table and made the cutlery rattle, and the seat at the centre of the staff table, the seat where the headmaster sat, was empty. Because Dumbledore was already gone. Had left the castle before dawn, moving through the pre-morning darkness with a speed and purpose that belied his age, heading toward the Ministry, toward the Wizengamot, toward every lever of power he possessed. He would pull every one of them. It would not be enough. Azkaban was not what the books described. The books described a fortress, grey stone, iron doors, the howling of the wind and the screaming of the inmates. The Dementors, gliding through corridors that had never known warmth, feeding on despair, reducing human beings to hollow shells that breathed but did not live. The books were accurate, but accuracy and experience are different things, and what the books could not convey, what no amount of description could prepare you for, was the cold. Not the physical cold, though that was present. The stone walls of Azkaban were perpetually damp, perpetually grey, perpetually 3 degrees below the temperature at which human comfort was possible. The cells were 6 feet by 8 feet, with a stone shelf for a bed and a bucket for everything else, and a window that was too small to see through and too large to keep out the wind. But the cold that mattered, the cold that defined the Azkaban experience, was internal. The cold of the Dementors. The slow, relentless, systematic extraction of every positive emotion, every happy memory, every fragment of warmth that a human being carries inside them as insulation against the fundamental darkness of existence. Harry arrived at Azkaban on a Tuesday afternoon in August. He was transported by boat, the same route that every prisoner had taken since the fortress was built in the 15th century. The North Sea was grey. The fortress emerged from the mist like a monument to despair, and Harry looked at it and felt the first Dementor touch his mind before the boat had even reached the dock. His mother's screams. The green light. The sound Cedric made when the killing curse hit him. The emptiness in Sirius's eyes when he talked about his own years in this place. Sirius. Harry had not thought about Sirius, had not had time. But now, approaching the fortress on the grey sea, he thought about his godfather. 12 years. 12 years in this place, innocent, abandoned, forgotten, and Sirius had survived, had emerged damaged but alive, broken but functional, changed but not destroyed. If Sirius could survive 12 years, Harry could survive too. He told himself this as the boat docked. Told himself this as the auras led him through the iron doors. Told himself this as his possessions were catalogued: glasses, shoes, belt, the clothes on his back, all removed and replaced with grey prison robes that smelled like mould and resignation. told himself this as they walked him down the corridor, past cells that contained shapes that had once been, past the sound of weeping and the sound of silence and the sound of someone laughing, which was worse than both. Cell number 417. 4th floor, north wing. They removed his chains, closed the door. The lock engaged with a sound like a bone breaking. Harry stood in the cell, 6 feet by 8 feet. Stone shelf. Bucket. Window. He sat down on the shelf, put his head in his hands, and began to build the walls. Not physical walls, mental walls. The occlumency that Snape had not yet taught him that, in another version of events, he would have struggled with and failed at and fought against. But Harry did not have Snape. Harry did not have Dumbledore. Harry did not have his wand or his friends or his owl or the castle that had been his home for 4 years. Harry had his mind. And his mind, untrained in occlumency but trained in survival by 10 years in a cupboard under the stairs, began to build. He thought of Ron. Of the train ride in first year, the chocolate frogs, the easy grin. He placed the memory behind a wall. He thought of Hermione. Of the library, the raised hand, the fierce certainty that knowledge was the most powerful weapon in the world. He placed the memory. He thought of Hogwarts. Of the great hall and the common room and the Quidditch pitch. Of Hedwig on his windowsill. Of Hagrid's cabin and Dumbledore's office and the way the castle looked at night when the windows were lit and the lake was dark and the world felt, for a brief, fragile moment, safe. He placed all of it behind the wall. And then, when the wall was built and the memories were protected and the Dementors pressed against the edges of his consciousness like wolves against a fence, Harry Potter did something that the Dementors had never encountered before. He got angry. Anger is not a positive emotion. It does not produce warmth or light or the silver glow of it does not drive back Dementors the way happiness does, the way love does, the way the memory of a mother's sacrifice does. But anger is not despair, either, and Dementors feed on despair. They cannot feed on rage. Rage is too hot, too sharp, too alive. It burns the mouth, it cuts the tongue. It is, in the ecosystem of human emotion, the one thing that Dementors cannot digest. Harry was angry. Not the petulant anger of a teenager who has been grounded. Not the righteous anger of a hero confronting injustice. Something deeper. Something geological. An anger that had been forming since he was a baby, left on a doorstep in November. An anger that had been compressed by 10 years in a cupboard, by years of being told he was worthless, by the discovery of magic and the hope it brought, and the systematic, meticulous destruction of that hope by a government that feared him more than it feared the Dark Lord he was telling them about. The anger said, I survived the killing curse. I killed a basilisk. I faced Voldemort in a graveyard and lived. I am Harry Potter, and you put me in a box. And the box is not big enough, and the walls are not strong enough, and the Dementors are not cold enough, because I have been in boxes before and I have always gotten out. The Dementors circled his cell, pressed against the door, reached through the gaps with their rotting hands and their rattling breath, and found nothing to feed on. Because Harry's despair was behind the wall, and what was in front of the wall, and fire cannot be consumed by cold. It can only be endured until the cold retreats or the fire dies. Harry's fire did not die. Outside Azkaban, the world was burning in a different way. Dumbledore moved. Not public action would be met with public resistance, and Fudge's administration was too invested in the conviction to reverse it through ordinary channels. Dumbledore moved through the network of allies and contacts and former students who occupied positions of influence throughout the wizarding world. He visited Amelia Bones first. The head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, A woman whose commitment to justice was as legendary as her commitment to procedure. The conviction is unsound, Dumbledore said, sitting across from her in her office at the Ministry, a cup of tea growing cold between them. I know it is. Then why did you not intervene? Because the Wizengamot voted unanimously. Albus, unanimously. That means every member, including the ones I trust, the ones I believe in, the ones I would have expected to dissent, voted to convict. That does not happen through incompetence, that happens through pressure. What kind of pressure? The kind that Fudge has been building to this since the boy came back from the Triwizard Tournament claiming Voldemort had returned. The conviction is not about the Patronus, it's about silencing the only witness to Voldemort's return. You believe Voldemort has returned? I believe a 14-year-old boy went into a maze and came out holding a dead classmate and saying things that the Ministry cannot afford. Whether I believe Voldemort has returned is irrelevant. What matters is that the Ministry has chosen to imprison the boy rather than examine his claims. Then help me free him. Amelia Bones was quiet. Her monocle glinted. I will do what I can, she said. But you must understand the political landscape has shifted. Fudge has consolidated power. The Prophet is under him. The public is afraid. And afraid people do not want to hear that a Dark Lord has returned. They want to be told that everything is fine. And imprisoning Harry Potter tells them that everything is fine, that the boy is a liar, that the danger is imaginary, that the Ministry is in control. The Ministry is not in control. No, but the illusion of control is, for most people, sufficient. Dumbledore left the Ministry, walked through the atrium, past the fountain with its golden statues, the witch, the wizard, the centaur, the goblin, the house elf, all arranged in a hierarchy of magical importance that was, like most hierarchies, self-serving and inaccurate. He paused at the fountain, looked at the water. And Albus Dumbledore, who had spent decades playing a long game, who had manipulated and manoeuvred and positioned pieces on a board that spanned continents and generations, felt something he had not felt since Ariana died. Helplessness. The boy was in Azkaban. The Dark Lord was rising, and the system that was supposed to protect both was doing neither. The Order of the Phoenix met that night at Grimmauld Place. The kitchen table was crowded. Sirius, gaunt and furious, pacing behind his chair because sitting was beyond him. Lupin, quiet and ashen, his hands clasped on the table. Molly Weasley, who had been crying and was now not crying, which was worse, because Molly's not crying face was the face of a woman who had processed grief and arrived at action. Arthur, beside her, his hand on hers. Mad-Eye Moody, his magical eyes spinning, scanning the room for threats that were not present, but that Moody could not stop. Tonks, Kingsley, Snape, standing in the corner, arms folded, face unreadable, and Ron and Hermione, who were not Order members, who were not supposed to be there, who had arrived by Flu Network 40 minutes before the meeting with the combined force of Weasley's stubbornness and Granger determination, and who had refused to leave with a ferocity that made Molly's protests seem... He's my best friend, Ron said, when his mother tried to send him upstairs. He's in prison. I'm not going to bed. Ronald, I'm not going to bed, Mum. Molly looked at her son. At the set of his jaw, the white knuckles, the absolute refusal to be anywhere other than where the decisions were being made. And she saw in that moment something she had been dreading since the day he was born. Her child. In circumstances that no child should have to face. Sit down, she said, both of you. They sat. Dumbledore arrived last, took his place at the head of the table, looked at the assembled faces, the fighters, the spies, the parents, the children, and said the thing they were all thinking, and none of them wanted to hear. Harry is in Azkaban. The legal avenues for his release, the political avenues are, at present, non-existent. And the situation is about to become significantly worse. Because Voldemort knows. The room went cold. How? Sirius demanded. Because Voldemort has agents inside the Ministry. Because the conviction was reported in every newspaper in the wizarding world. And because Voldemort is not a fool, he understands what Harry's imprisonment means. The boy who is prophesied to defeat him is now wandless, isolated, and surrounded by Dementors. From Voldemort's perspective, the Ministry has done his work for. Then we break him out, Sirius said. We cannot. We can. I escaped Azkaban. I know the fortress. I know the layout, the guard rotations, the weak points in the wards. You escaped Azkaban as a dog, Sirius. You slipped through the bars in animagus form because the Dementors could not detect animal emotions. Harry is not an animagus. He cannot escape the same way. Then we go in force. The Order. Tonight. And fight whom? The Aurors who guard the fortress? The Ministry employees who are following orders they believe to be lawful? Shall we declare war on the government, Sirius, and prove everything Fudge has said about us? That we are a rogue militia, operating outside the law, led by a man who wants to overthrow the Ministry? Sirius's hand, his face, which had been gaunt since his escape from Azkaban 2 years ago, and which had never fully recovered the weight or the colour of a man who had not spent 12 years being consumed by despair, was white. He is my godson, Sirius said, James's son. I swore to protect him. I know. I failed him. Again, I failed him when I went after Pettigrew instead of... I failed him when I couldn't prove my innocence fast enough, and now I'm failing him again. You are not failing him. The system is failing him. And systems can be changed. Not fast enough. Dumbledore was quiet. The room was quiet. The fireplace crackled. No, Dumbledore said. Not fast enough. Snape spoke from the corner. His voice was flat, controlled, stripped of every emotion except precision. The Dark Lord is planning something. I can feel it through the mark. Activity, movement, something is being organised. What? I do not know yet. But the timing is not coincidental. Potter's imprisonment has created an opportunity, and the Dark Lord does not waste opportunities. You think he'll move on Azkaban? I think he will move on everything. Azkaban, the Ministry, Hogwarts, the boy's imprisonment has destabilised the entire defensive structure. Dumbledore's influence at the Ministry is compromised. The Order is distracted. The public believes the threat is imaginary. Every piece on the board has shifted in the Dark Lord's favour. Because of one trial, Hermione said. Quietly, from the end of the table. Because of one decision, Snape corrected. The decision to silence the truth rather than face it. That is always how it begins. The meeting continued, plans were made, contingencies were discussed. But underneath the strategy, underneath the careful analysis and the allocation of resources and the debate about legal options and rescue scenarios, there was something else. Fear, not the fear of Voldemort, though that was present. The fear of time. The fear that every day Harry spent in Azkaban, surrounded by Dementors, stripped of warmth and memory and hope, was a day that changed him. That damaged him. That took pieces of him that could not be replaced. They were afraid that by the time they got him out, if they got him out, the Harry they knew would be gone. Harry counted the days. Breakfast was porridge, served through a slot in the door by a guard who never spoke. Lunch was bread and water. Dinner was something that might once have been stew, but had long since evolved into a grey, flavourless paste that tasted like the idea of food rather than food itself. 3 meals. One day, scratched into the wall beside the stone shelf with the edge of a button that Harry had found in the seam of his prison robes. The first week was the worst. The Dementors were constant. Not visible, they did not stand in the corridor and stare through the door the way they did in the stories. They were above, around, below, a presence in the fabric of the building itself, woven into the stones and the air and the light. which was never true light but a dim, grey approximation that seemed to come from nowhere and illuminate nothing. Harry's anger sustained him through the first 3 days. Hot, pure, righteous anger that burned in his chest like a coal and kept the cold at a distance. But anger is not sustainable. Anger requires energy, and energy requires food and sleep and human contact, and Azkaban provided none of these in sufficient quantity. By the 4th day, the anger began to cool. By the 5th day, it was embers. By the 6th day, Harry was lying on the stone shelf staring at the ceiling, and the Dementors were closer, pressing against the walls of his mind, whispering things that were not words but were understood anyway. You are nothing. You are a boy in a box. You have always been a boy in a box. The cupboard, the cell, the same. Always the same. Always small. Always locked. Always alone. Harry closed his eyes, reached for the wall, found the memories. Ron laughing, Hermione reading, Hagrid holding a dragon egg, the burrow warm and chaotic and alive, Dumbledore eyes twinkling offering a lemon drop. The memories were dimmer, faded like photographs left in the sun. The Dementors were not taking them Harry's wall held, but they were dimming them, reducing the colour, the warmth, the emotional charge, turning vivid memories into flat images, like the difference between watching a sunset and looking at a painting of one. You are alone. I'm not, Harry said, to the cell, to the dark, to the things that pressed against his mind. You are alone. They left you. They put you here. They didn't fight hard enough. They didn't care enough. You are alone because you have always been alone, and you will always be alone. Harry pressed his hands against his face. Breathed, he thought about the Patronus, about the silver stag that had burst from his wand at the lake in 3rd year, driving back 100 Dementors, saving Sirius, saving himself. He could not cast the Patronus without a wand. But he could remember it, could remember the feeling, the light, the warmth, the fierce, burning conviction that he was not alone, had never been alone, would never be alone as long as there were people in the world who loved him. The feeling was there, dim, distant, but there. Harry held it, wrapped himself around it, let it glow in the darkness. The Dementors retreated. Not far, not enough, but enough for Harry to breathe. Enough for Harry to sit up on the stone shelf and look at the scratches on the wall and count 7. 1 week. 97 to go. The letters came on the 8th day. Not through the mail. Azkaban prisoners were not permitted mail. Through the guard. The one who never spoke, who slid the porridge through the slot each morning, who had never looked at Harry, never acknowledged his existence, never indicated by any gesture or expression that the person inside the cell was a human being rather than a package to be stored. This morning the porridge came with a folded piece of parchment. Harry stared at it, reached for it, opened it. The handwriting was Hermione's. Small, precise, urgent. Harry, Ron and I are working on getting you out. Dumbledore is fighting the conviction. The Order is planning. Do not give up. We are coming. The guard's name is Perkins. He worked with Mr. Weasley at the Ministry before he was reassigned. He agreed to carry letters. We can't send many, he's taking a risk, but we wanted you to know that you are not forgotten. You are not alone. We love you. Hermione below Hermione's writing, in a handwriting that was larger and less controlled, and that showed signs of the quill pressing hard enough to nearly tear the parchment, what she said. Also, the Cannons won their first match in Thought You'd Want to Know. Hang in there, mate Ron. Harry read the letter 3 times. 4, 5, then he pressed it against his chest and held it there, and the warmth that came from it was not physical and was not magical, but was real in a way that the cold of the Dementors was not. Because the warmth was from people, specific people, people who existed in the world, people who were working, fighting, refusing to accept that this was how the story ended. He was not alone. The Dementors pulled back. Week 3. Sirius came, not in person, in dog form. Padfoot, slipping through the bars of the outer perimeter during a storm, when the rain was heavy enough to cover the sound of wet paws on stone, and the Dementors were distracted by the intensity of despair radiating from the upper floors, where the old prisoners lived, the ones who had been there for decades and who had long since forgotten what warmth felt like. Sirius transformed in the corridor outside Harry's cell, pressed his face against the door. Harry was on the stone shelf. He sat up, moved to the door, pressed his face against the other side. Sirius? I'm here. I got in. I can't stay long, the guards change in 20 minutes. You shouldn't be here. I spent 12 years in this place. I know it better than anyone, and I was not going to let you spend another night here without hearing a friendly voice. Harry pressed his forehead against the cold iron of the door. Through the gaps he could see a sliver of Sirius's face, gaunt, determined, alive. Tell me about the outside, Harry said. Dumbledore is working on an appeal. Hermione has filed 17 motions with the Wizengamot. 17? The woman is a force of nature. She's 15. She's Hermione. Age is irrelevant. And Ron? Ron has been in contact with Neville and Luna and half of Gryffindor. They've organised something, I don't know what exactly, but Molly keeps finding pamphlets around the burrow. Free Harry Potter. The twins printed them. Harry almost laughed. Almost the sound that came out was too broken to be a laugh. But the intention was there. The Dementors, Sirius said. Talk to me about them. They're constant. They press. They whisper. They take the colour out of everything. I know. I know exactly what that feels like. Listen to me, Harry. The trick is not to fight them. You can't fight them. They're not alive. They don't have weaknesses. They don't get tired. The trick is to give them nothing. Nothing? Nothing they want. So don't give them despair. Give them something else. Give them anger. Give them stubbornness. Give them the particular pig-headed refusal to break that you inherited from your mother and your father and your godfather and every bloody person who has ever loved you. I don't know how much longer I can hold. You hold for as long as it takes. Because the alternative is letting them win. And we do not let them win, Harry. That is the family motto. The Potter motto. The Black motto. The Gryffindor motto. We do not let the bastards win. Sirius pressed his hand against the door. Harry pressed his hand on the other side. They could not touch. But the gesture was there, separated by 2 inches of iron, and the gesture was enough. I'm going to get you out of here, Sirius said. I know. You don't have to promise. I do. Because promises are the only things the Dementors can't take. They can take your memories, your happiness, your will. They cannot take a promise made by someone who loves you. Sirius, I promise, Harry, on your parents' memory, I will get you out. Sirius transformed. Padfoot slipped through the bars, disappeared. Harry sat in his cell and held his hand against the door where Sirius's hand had been and felt the warmth linger and counted. 21. 3 weeks, 81 to go. The second month was when Harry discovered the other prisoners. Not discovered them physically, he had known from the beginning that the cells around him were occupied. But in the second month, a voice came through the wall. Clear, deliberate, human. Boy, you're new. Who are you? Name doesn't matter. Been here 11 years. Name stopped mattering around year 3. What happened at year 3? Forgot it. The Dementors took it. They take the small things first, names, dates, faces, then they take the big things. Happiness, purpose, the memory of what sunshine feels like. I remember sunshine. Good, hold on to that. Sunshine is the last thing to go. The voice became Harry's only human contact aside from Perkins's smuggled letters. The prisoner taught Harry things, not magic. Survival, how to sleep on stone, fold the robe into a pillow, lie on your side, never your back. How to measure time, the guard's footsteps came at intervals. A clock if you listened. How to exercise 3 steps forward, 3 steps back, repeated until your legs remembered movement. The body forgets, the prisoner said. If you don't move, the body forgets how. After a year, you can't walk properly. Move every day. Harry moved. 3 steps forward, 3 steps back. Every day. A caged animal refusing to forget freedom. The 3rd month was when the dreams changed. Not Dementor dreams, Scar dreams. The leaking connection between Harry and Voldemort that the mental walls could not... He saw Voldemort through static. A room, a chair, a snake, Death Eaters kneeling. Plans being made, strategies discussed. He could not hear the words, but he could feel the intent. The cold, systematic planning of a man rebuilding his army while Harry's world had locked its best weapon in a box. Harry told Perkins, wrote intelligence in the margins of Hermione's letters, encode a substitution cipher from their arithmancy textbook. The information reached the Order, reached Snape, who read the decoded messages and felt something move in his chest. The boy was still fighting. From a cell. Without a wand. Through a connection to the darkest wizard alive. Gathering intelligence through smuggled letters and coded messages, because Harry Potter did not know how to stop. The boy is extraordinary, Dumbledore said. The boy is reckless, Snape said. Those are not mutually exclusive. The 4th and 5th months were the plateau. The routine had become structure. 3 steps forward, 3 steps back. Conversations through the wall, letters from Perkins, coded intelligence reports. Harry read Hermione's letters 20, 30, 40 times each. For the particular quality of her handwriting that communicated, through its precision, the depth of care behind it. Ron's postscripts were different. Messy, sprawling, full of irrelevant details about Quidditch and meals and Neville accidentally setting fire to the common room curtains. They were more comforting than Hermione's because they were so completely Ron, a boy who could not write to a prisoner without mentioning treacle tart and the cannons losing again. Ron made Harry laugh from 700 miles away. That was a kind of magic no wand could produce and no Dementor could consume. The 6th month brought a visitor Harry did not expect. The cell door opened. An aura stood in the corridor. Behind him, a supervised visit. Authorized by Amelia Bones. 30 minutes. Molly looked at the cell, at the stone shelf, at the bucket, at the scratches on the wall. Her face did something complicated. Then it settled into the expression that said, "This is wrong, and I am going to fix it." "You're too thin," she said. "The food isn't great." She brought biscuits. "I made these." They checked them for contraband. Apparently homemade biscuits require a dark detection spell these days. Mrs. Weasley don't. "I have been baking these every week for 6 months because I cannot come here and I cannot send a package and I cannot do anything except bake biscuits that nobody eats because they're for you and you're in this place and I can't reach you." The hairline fracture of a woman who had spent 6 months holding herself together. "I'm okay, Mrs. Weasley. You will be. Because I am going to get you out of here and take you home and feed you until you cannot move." The biscuits tasted like the burrow, like warmth and cinnamon and the kind of magic that comes from love not wand magic. The other kind. The kind that fills you with so much warmth that the cold cannot reach you. The 30 minutes passed. Molly stood, put her hands on his shoulders. "You are my son," she said, "in every way that matters." She left. The door closed. Harry sat on the stone shelf and ate the last biscuit and cried. Not the Azkaban cry, silent, internal, a-real cry, the kind that comes from being loved so fiercely that the love breaks through every wall. The Dementors pressed against the door. Harry cried harder. And the Dementors retreated. Because what Harry was feeling was not despair. It was the overwhelming, devastating, beautiful pain of being loved, which is the most powerful emotion that exists and which no Dementor has ever consumed. The world did not wait for Harry Potter. In the months that followed, while Harry marked days on the wall of his cell and held letters against his chest and fought the Dementors with stubbornness and anger and the memories behind his wall, the wizarding world underwent a transformation that was, in retrospect, entirely predictable and entirely preventable. Voldemort moved. Not openly, not yet, the Dark Lord was a strategist, and strategists do not reveal their strength until the moment of maximum advantage. Instead, he moved through proxies, through the Death Eaters who had returned to his service after the graveyard, through the corruption that had always existed in the Ministry, the racism and the fear and the willingness to look the other way that was, in the end, more dangerous than any Dark Lord. Lucius Malfoy's influence in the Ministry expanded. The Daily Prophet became, more and more openly, a propaganda organ for the Fudge administration. The message was simple and effective. There is no threat. Voldemort has not returned. Harry Potter was a disturbed child who lied about the Triwizard Tournament and attacked his Muggle cousin and who is now safely in prison, where disturbed children belong. The public believed it. Most of them. Not because they were stupid. The wizarding public was no more or less intelligent than any other public in the history of the world, but because belief is not a function of intelligence. Belief is a function of comfort. And the message from the Ministry was comfortable. It said, the world is safe. You don't have to be afraid. The scary things are not real. Meanwhile, in the fortress in the North Sea, the scary thing grew stronger. Harry changed. Not in the dramatic, visible way that long-term Azkaban prisoners changed the weight loss, the hollow eyes, the slow dissolution of personality into a grey, featureless despair. Harry's change was different. Internal, structural. He grew harder. Not crueler, not colder, but harder. The way steel is hardened by heat and pressure. The softness that had defined him, the willingness to trust, the instinct to forgive, the belief that people were fundamentally good and that the world, despite its many failures, was trying, that softness did not survive Azkaban. What replaced it was not its opposite. Not cynicism, not bitterness, not the sullen rage of a boy who has been wronged and wants the world to suffer for it. What replaced it was clarity. A precise, unflinching understanding of how power worked. Who had it? Who used it? Who it served and who it destroyed. The Ministry had power. The Ministry had used it to imprison a child for political convenience. The Ministry's power served the people who ran it and destroyed the people who threatened it. Voldemort had power. Voldemort used it to kill and control and dominate. Dumbledore had power. Dumbledore had used it to try to protect Harry, and had failed, because Dumbledore's power was influence, and influence requires systems, and systems can be corrupted. Harry had power. His power was survival. His power was the scar on his forehead, and the prophecy behind it, and the connection to the Dark Lord that hummed through his consciousness like a live wire. And Harry, sitting in his cell, counting days, holding letters, fighting Dementors with stubbornness and the gradually hardening steel of a boy becoming a man under the worst possible conditions, began to understand something that Dumbledore had spent decades learning and that Voldemort had always known. Power is not given. It is taken. And the people who take it are the ones who survive. The break came in February, not a jailbreak. Not a rescue mission, something stranger, something that the Order of the Phoenix had not planned and Dumbledore had not foreseen, and that changed the trajectory of the war in ways that no one predicted. The Dementors left. Not all of them. Not at once. But over the course of 3 days in mid-February, the population of Dementors at Azkaban reduced by approximately half. They drifted away from the fortress in groups of 10 and 20, gliding across the North Sea like dark clouds, heading south. Heading toward Voldemort. This had been predicted. Dumbledore had warned the Ministry for months that the Dementors were unreliable, that their allegiance was to despair rather than to authority, and that Voldemort, who could offer them an unlimited supply of victims, was a more attractive master than a ministry that kept them chained to a fortress in the middle of the ocean. The Ministry did not listen. The Ministry never listened. And now half the Dementors of Azkaban were gone, and the fortress was suddenly, startlingly, partially warm. Harry felt the change. Woke up one morning and the cold was different, still present, still biting, but reduced. The whispers were quieter. The pressure was less. The memories behind his wall, which had been dimming for months, slowly began to brighten. He sat up on the stone shelf, looked at the scratches on the wall. 178. 6 months. He had been here for 6 months. And the Dementors were leaving. The guard Perkins slid a note through the slot with the morning porridge. The Dementors have defected. Dumbledore is using it as grounds for emergency appeal. The Wizengamot convenes next week. Hold on. Harry held the note. Read it again. Then he stood up, walked to the window. The window was too small to see through, but through the gap he could see a sliver of sky, and the sky was blue. Not grey. Blue, he had not seen blue in 6 months. Something moved in. Not hope. Hope was too fragile, too vulnerable to the Dementors who remained. Something harder. Something that had been forged in 6 months of cold and dark and silence. Determination. He was going to get out. He was going to walk out of this fortress and back into the world and face Voldemort and end this. Not because the prophecy said so. Not because Dumbledore wanted it. Because the boy who had been put in a box had decided that the box was temporary and that the world outside it was permanent and that he was going to see it again. The emergency session of the Wizengamot was held on March 3rd. The courtroom was packed. Every member, the gallery overflowing with reporters, ministry officials, and members of the public who had obtained tickets through, means both legal and creative. Dumbledore stood before the court. The Dementors have abandoned their posts at Azkaban. This is not a staffing issue. This is a declaration. The creatures that guard our prison have chosen to serve Lord Voldemort rather than the Ministry of Magic. This fact, this undeniable, observable, empirically verifiable fact, confirms what Harry Potter told this body 8 months ago. Voldemort has returned. The boy told the truth. And this body convicted him for it. Fudge in the minister's chair was sweating, his bowler hat was slightly askew, his face was the colour of old porridge. The Dementors' departure is unrelated to the Potter case, it is entirely related. The Dementors have gone to Voldemort because Voldemort can offer them what the Ministry cannot: an unlimited supply of human misery. This is what Harry Potter warned us about. This is what he saw in the graveyard. And instead of listening, we chained him to a chair and sent him to prison. Amelia Bones stood. I move for immediate review of the Potter conviction on grounds of new evidence. Seconded, said Augusta Longbottom, who had been waiting for exactly this moment and whose voice carried the particular authority of a woman who had survived 2 wars and was not about to tolerate a third caused by bureaucratic cowardice. Fudge looked at the faces that had been, 8 months ago, unanimously in his favour, and saw that the unanimity had evaporated like morning fog, burned away by the reality that the Dementors had made impossible to deny. The vote was 43-7. The conviction was overturned. Harry Potter was to be released immediately. The boat came on a Thursday morning, March 5th. Harry heard the door open, heard footsteps, heard a voice he recognised. Miss Potter, you are free to go. Kingsley Shacklebolt. Tall, calm, solid as bedrock. An aura who had voted against Harry's conviction and who had spent the past 6 months working in secret with the Order to make this moment happen. Harry stood. His legs were weak. 6 months of a cell had reduced his physical capacity to something barely functional. He was thinner. His hair was longer. His eyes, behind the glasses that had been returned to him, were different, harder, older, the eyes of someone who has seen the worst thing and has not looked away. He walked out of the cell, down the corridor, past the remaining Dementors, who pressed against the walls and reached for him and found nothing, because Harry Potter's despair was gone, consumed by the fire that had burned in him, replaced by something colder and harder and more dangerous than despair. Clarity. He walked through the iron doors, onto the dock, into the boat. The North Sea was grey, the sky was blue. And Harry Potter sat in the bow of the boat and watched Azkaban shrink behind him and felt the sun on his face for the first time in 6 months, and did not cry. In a room at Grimmauld Place, with Ron and Hermione and Sirius, in the arms of Molly Weasley, who held him the way you hold something precious that has been returned to you after you thought it was lost forever. He would cry in the dark, at night, when the memories came, not the Dementor memories, but the real ones, the memories of the cell and the cold and the whispers and the long, terrible count. But that was later. Right now, in the boat, on the sea, heading toward land and light and the people who loved him, Harry Potter did not cry. He watched the fortress disappear into the mist. And he made a promise. Not to Sirius, not to Dumbledore, not to Ron or Hermione, or the Order, or the Wizengamot. To himself. He would never be in a box again. The world Harry returned to was not the world he had left. 6 months had changed everything. The Ministry was in chaos, Fudge's grip on power was slipping, the Dementor defection had shattered public confidence, and the opposition, led by Amelia Bones and supported by Dumbledore's network, was growing stronger every day. Voldemort was visible now. Not in person, the Dark Lord still operated through proxies and intermediaries, but his influence was disappearances had increased. The Dark Mark had appeared over 3 Muggle homes. The Death Eaters were recruiting openly, emboldened by the Ministry's failure and the public's growing fear. And Harry was changed. Ron saw it first. At Grimmauld Place, the day after Harry's release, when Harry came down to breakfast and Ron looked at his best friend and saw someone who was Harry, and who had the same face and the same eyes and the same scar, but who carried himself differently, who occupied space differently, who looked at the world with an assessment that had not been there before. "You're different," Ron said. "Yes? Bad different?" Harry considered this. Different. I'll tell you about it when I understand it myself." Hermione hugged him, held on. When she let go, her eyes were doing the rapid cycling thing, analysing, categorising, processing the changes in Harry the way she processed everything, with frightening speed and accuracy. "You've been practicing occlumency," she said. "In a way. I built walls to protect the memories. That's rudimentary occlumency. I didn't know. You had 6 months in the most hostile mental environment on Earth, and you taught yourself to protect your own mind without a wand or a teacher. Harry, that's extraordinary. It's survival. I've always been good at survival." Sirius came downstairs. Saw Harry. Stopped. They looked at each other. The godfather and the godson. The man who had survived 12 years and the boy who had survived 6 months. They stood in the kitchen of Grimmauld Place and recognised in each other something that nobody else in the room could fully understand. The invisible, indelible mark that Azkaban leaves on everyone who passes through its doors. Not a scar, not a wound, but a change in the way you see the world. A filter, a lens. The understanding that the world contains a depth of darkness that most people cannot imagine, and that you have been to the bottom of it and come back. "You're here," Sirius said. "I'm here. You made it. I made it." Sirius crossed the room, put his hands on Harry's shoulders, looked at him with the eyes of a man who knew, from personal experience, exactly what Harry was carrying. "It gets better," Sirius said. "I won't lie, it never goes away. But it gets better. I know. How do you know? Because I'm here. And being here is better than being there. And that means it's already better. Sirius's face did something. Then he pulled Harry into a hug that was not gentle, but was real. The hug of someone who has been where you have been and who needs you to know that you are not alone in the experience. Welcome back, Sirius said. Harry held on, closed his eyes. Home, the war that followed, was not the war that anyone expected. Harry returned, not as a student too much had changed for that. Too much of the boy who had sat in classrooms and worried about homework and played Quidditch had been consumed by the fire. He returned as something else. Something that did not have a name yet, but that would, in the months that followed, become clear. A leader. Not the leader that Dumbledore had been distant, playing a long game with pieces that were sometimes people and were sometimes ideas. Not the leader that Fudge had been small, political, interested in power rather than responsibility. Something new, something that had been forged in a cell in the North Sea and tempered by 6 months of dark and cold. Harry organised the Dar. Not the version from before the Student Defence Group, the secret club that met in the Room of Requirement. This was different. This was a resistance movement. Structured, disciplined, purposeful, trained not in defensive spells, though those were part of it, but in the skills that actual resistance required: intelligence gathering, communication, coordination, the ability to make decisions under pressure and live with the consequences. We are not children playing at war, Harry told the Dar in the Room of Requirement in their first meeting after his return. We are soldiers in an actual war. Some of us will be hurt, some of us may die. If that is not something you can face, leave now. No one will think less of you. No one left. Neville Longbottom was in the front row. His face was set. His wand was steady. I visited your parents at St. Mungo's last week, Neville said after the meeting. They don't recognise me. They never will. The people who did that to them are out there, serving Voldemort, planning to do the same thing to other families. I'm not leaving. Luna Lovegood was beside him. I'm not leaving either, although I do think we should schedule meetings around the blibbering Humdinger migration, which is in late April. We'll take it under advisement, Harry said. Ginny Weasley was in the second row. Her face was her mother's face, the not crying face, the face of action rather than grief. She had spent 6 months watching her family agonise over Harry's imprisonment, watching her brother pace the floors of Grimmauld Place, watching her parents argue about what could be done and what couldn't. She had spent 6 months being told that she was too young, that she should leave this to the adults, that children did not belong in wars. She disagreed. I'm fighting, Ginny said. Not because you're asking me to, because I was going to fight whether you asked or not. The question is whether I fight alone or with people who know what they're doing. Harry looked at her, at the red hair and the brown eyes and the fierce, settled determination, and felt something shift in the landscape of his interior life, something warm. Something that was not the fire of Azkaban, but was related to it. Something that the Dementors had failed to extinguish because it had not existed before Azkaban, and had only come into being in the clarity that followed. You fight with us, Harry said. Voldemort attacked the Ministry in June. The battle was brutal, chaotic, and decisive. Death Eaters poured into the Department of Mysteries. The Order responded. Harry led the Dar through corridors that had never been designed for warfare, casting spells he had taught himself in the silence of his cell. Sirius fought beside him. Bellatrix Lestrange cast a curse. Sirius dodged. Harry pulled Sirius back from the veil physically, forcefully, with hands that had spent 6 months gripping a stone shelf, and Bellatrix's curse hit the wall instead of Sirius. That was close, Sirius said. Too close. Stay behind me. I'm your godfather. I don't stay behind anyone. You stay behind me, or I hex you myself." Sirius looked at Harry, at the 15-year-old boy who had survived Azkaban, who was giving tactical orders to a room full of adults, who was in this moment the most dangerous person on the battlefield, not because he was the most powerful, but because he was the most focused, the most clear, the most completely present. "You sound like your mother," Sirius said. Good. She was usually right. The battle ended. The Death Eaters retreated. The Ministry was in shambles. Fudge was removed from office. Amelia Bones became minister. Dumbledore was restored. And Harry Potter, standing in the wreckage of the Department of Mysteries, covered in dust and sweat and the residue of magic that would take days to fully dissipate, looked at the destruction and felt something that was not victory and was not relief and was not the satisfaction of a battle won. It was readiness. He was ready. For Voldemort. For the Horcruxes. For the prophecy and whatever it demanded. He was ready. Because Azkaban had taken everything soft from him, and what remained was the core, the essential, irreducible Harry Potter. The boy who survived. The man who would fight. The person who had been to the bottom of the darkness, and had come back with the knowledge that the bottom was not the end. There was always something below the bottom. Always a way through. Always a door that could be opened if you were willing to pay the price. Harry was willing. He had already paid. The rest of the story is the story everyone knows, told differently. The Horcrux hunt, the locket, the cup, the diadem, the 7 pieces of a Dark Lord's soul, hunted and destroyed by 3 people: a boy who had survived prison, a girl who had filed 17 legal motions at the age of 15, and a boy who had refused to go to bed because his best friend was in danger. Ron and Hermione walked beside Harry through every step. They had walked beside him through the trial and the conviction and the 6 months of letters and the rescue and the return. They walked beside him now, through forests and caves and vaults, through dangers that would have destroyed lesser friendships and that only made theirs stronger. Because friendship, real friendship, is not formed in good times. It is formed in the spaces between good times, in the fear and the grief and the silence of a cell and the warmth of a letter pressed against, in the words "we love you" written on parchment smuggled through a prison door, in the refusal to leave, the refusal to forget, the refusal to accept that the story ends here. Their friendship had been forged in Azkaban. Not because Azkaban was good, it was the worst thing that had ever happened to any of them, but because Azkaban had tested the thing between them, tested it to destruction, and it had not been destroyed. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. The war did not start with a battle. It started with a boy walking out of a prison and back into a world that had wronged. Let us go back to the details. To the summer before the trial. To the moments the history books skip. The summer of 1995 was the hottest on record in Little Winging, Surrey. Harry spent it the way he spent every summer at the Dursleys, in a state of isolation so total that it bordered on sensory deprivation. No letters from Ron. No letters from Hermione. No news from the wizarding world. Dumbledore had ordered silence, for reasons that Harry did not understand and that no one had bothered to explain. The Dementors came on a Tuesday evening. Harry and Dudley were walking home through the underpass beneath the railway line. The air changed first, the temperature dropped, the light dimmed, and the familiar, oppressive heat of Little Whinging was replaced by something else, something cold and wrong and ancient. "What's happening?" Dudley said. "Run," Harry said. They did not run fast enough. The Dementor materialized in the tunnel like a hole in the world, a void in the shape of a figure, cloaked and hooded, with hands that were grey and scabbed and rotting, reaching for Dudley with the deliberate, unhurried certainty of a creature that had never been denied its prey. Dudley fell. The Dementor bent over him. And Harry, who was wandless, who was 14, who was standing in a Muggle underpass in the most Muggle suburb in the most Muggle country in the world, drew his wand and cast the Patronus charm. Expecto Patronum. The silver stag erupted from the tip of his holly wand. It charged the Dementor, antlers lowered, blazing with light, and the Dementor recoiled and fled, and the underpass was warm again, and Dudley was on the ground, sobbing, and Harry was standing over him with his wand raised and his heart hammering, and the absolute unshakable conviction that he had done the right thing. He was correct. He had done the right thing. The Ministry disagreed. The owl arrived 40 minutes later. Harry was sitting on the front step of number 4, Privet Drive, watching Dudley eat his 4th chocolate bar in the living room and waiting for the shaking in his hands to stop. Mrs. Fig was there, the neighbour, the cat lady. The woman who Harry had just discovered was a squib and a member of the Order of the Phoenix, and who had been watching him for years on Dumbledore's orders. The owl was ministry official. Brown envelope. Purple seal. The letter was brief and comprehensive in the way that government communications are brief and comprehensive, every word chosen to convey maximum authority and minimum information. Dear Mr. Potter, the Ministry of Magic has detected that you performed the Patronus charm at 23 minutes past 9 this evening in a Muggle-inhabited area and in the presence of a Muggle. The severity of this breach of the decree for the reasonable restriction of underage sorcery and the International Statute of Secrecy has resulted in your immediate expulsion from Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Ministry representatives will be calling at your place of residence shortly to destroy your wand. Harry, read the letter. Read it again. They're expelling me. They can't, Mrs. Fig said. They're destroying my wand. Dumbledore won't allow it. Dumbledore isn't here. A second owl arrived. Then a third. The second was from Arthur Weasley. Harry, do not leave the house. Do not surrender your wand. Dumbledore is handling this. The third was from the Ministry again. Modifying the first letter, the expulsion was suspended pending a disciplinary hearing. Harry sat on the step and held his wand, the Holly Wand, Phoenix Feather Core, brother to Voldemort's wand, the wand that had saved his life in the graveyard 6 weeks ago, and felt the first tremor of something that was not fear, but was related to fear. The understanding that the thing he was holding could be taken from him. That the magic that had defined his life since the age of 11 was not a right but a privilege, and that privileges could be revoked by people who had the authority to revoke them and the willingness to use it. He gripped the wand tighter. The weeks between the Dementor attack and the hearing were the longest of Harry's life up to that point. He was moved to Grimmauld Place. This should have been a relief. He was out of the Dursleys. He was with the Order. He was surrounded by people who cared about him. But the atmosphere at Grimmauld Place was not the warm, chaotic welcome of the Burrow. It was tense, anxious. The adults spoke in low voices that stopped when Harry entered a room. The meetings happened behind closed doors. The information was rationed, parcelled out in fragments that told Harry just enough to know that something was wrong, and not enough to know what. Ron and Hermione were there. This helped. Ron was Ron, loyal, steady, incapable of hiding his emotions, which ranged from outraged they can't do this, it's mental, to terrified, what if they actually do this, to aggressively optimistic, Dum won't let them, he's Dumbledore, in the span of a single conversation. Hermione was Hermione, already reading every law and precedent and historical case study related to underage magic prosecutions, already building the legal case that she would eventually present to no one, because no one asked a 15-year-old girl for her legal analysis. She presented it anyway. The hearing is before the full Wizengamot, Hermione said, in Ron's bedroom at Grimmauld Place, 3 days before, surrounded by parchment and legal texts and the particular intensity that Hermione brought to everything she did. That's unusual. Underage magic cases are normally heard by the improper use of Magic Office. Fudge has escalated this to a full criminal proceeding. Why? Harry asked. Because a criminal proceeding allows for criminal penalties. The improper use office can confiscate your wand and expel you. The Wizengamot can send you to Azkaban. The room went cold. Azkaban, Ron said. They wouldn't. They might. The charge is use of underage magic in the presence of a muggle, but the real purpose of the trial is to discredit Harry. If he's convicted, if he's in prison, then his testimony about the graveyard becomes the testimony of a convicted. Fudge can dismiss everything Harry said about Voldemort as the ravings of an unstable boy who attacked his own cousin with dark magic. The Patronus isn't dark magic. We know that. The question is whether the Wizengamot knows that. Or cares. Harry looked at the ceiling. The ceiling of Grimmauld Place was cracked and grey and decorated with the occasional spider. It was not unlike the view from a cell, he would later reflect. Dumbledore will be there, Harry said. He'll speak for me. Yes, then it will be fine. Hermione was quiet. The quiet was louder than the conversation. Hermione? Dumbledore's influence at the Ministry has been declining for months. Fudge has been systematically removing Dumbledore's allies from positions of power. The Prophet has been publishing stories that portray Dumbledore as senile and power-hungry. The political landscape is different from a year ago. So what are you saying? I'm saying that Dumbledore is not invincible. And we should prepare for the possibility that this doesn't go the way we want. Ron stood up. It'll be fine. Dumbledore is Dumbledore. He faced down Grindelwald for Merlin's sake. He can handle Cornelius Bloody Fudge. But Hermione's eyes met Harry's across the room, and in her eyes, Harry saw something he had never seen there before. Not the certainty. Not the confidence. Not the unshakable belief that knowledge and logic and the correct application of the rules would produce the right outcome. Doubt, Hermione. And if Hermione doubted, the situation was worse than any of them had admitted. The hearing was scheduled for August the 2nd, then changed to July the 12th, then changed back, then moved to 8 o'clock in the morning, then changed to 9. The constant rescheduling was deliberate, designed to keep Harry and his supporters off balance, to create the impression of institutional chaos that was actually institutional malice. Dumbledore arrived at the hearing 7 minutes. This was also deliberate. The schedule change had been communicated to him incorrectly, an administrative error that was as accidental as a knife in the back. The courtroom was full. Not the small hearing room that had been originally assigned, but courtroom 10, the same courtroom where the Death Eaters had been tried after the First War. The same courtroom with the chains on the chair. Harry saw the chains and understood. This was not a hearing. This was a show trial. The outcome had been decided before Harry walked into the room. The evidence was irrelevant. The defense was irrelevant. The law was irrelevant. What was relevant was the message. The message that the Ministry of Magic, that people who said inconvenient things, people who claimed that Dark Lords had returned and that the government was incompetent and that children were in danger would be silenced. Not through violence, through bureaucracy, through the calm, procedural, legally sanctioned application of institutional power against an individual who had no power to resist. Harry sat in the chair. The chains moved, wrapped around his wrists. Tightened, the accused is charged with use of magic in the presence of a muggle, in violation of the decree for the reasonable restriction of underage sorcery and the International Statute of Secrecy, Fudge said. How does the accused plead? Not guilty, Harry said. I was defending myself and my cousin from Dementors. The Ministry has no record of Dementors. The Ministry doesn't have a record of a lot of things that are true. The gallery rustled. Fudge's face darkened. Dumbledore arrived, presented evidence, called witnesses. made arguments that were, by any legal standard, overwhelming the testimony of Mrs. Figg, who had seen the Dementors, the forensic analysis of Harry's wand, which showed only the Patronus charm, the precedent established by dozens of cases in which defensive magic in the presence of Muggles had been ruled lawful. It did not matter. The Wizengamot voted. 50 hands, unanimous, guilty. Harry watched the hands rise, watched 50 people, some of whom he recognised, some of whom had shaken his hand at the Quidditch World Cup a year ago, some of whom had children at Hogwarts who had been in the Dow, raise their hands and vote to send him to prison. He sat in the chains and looked at the people who were condemning him and memorised their faces. Not out of vengeance, out of the understanding that this was information, and information was the most valuable thing in the world, and the faces of the people who chose power over justice were faces he needed to remember. Dumbledore stood, protested, was overruled. Snape, in the gallery, watched with an expression that was unreadable but whose hands beneath his robes were clenched. McGonagall beside Snape was white. Her lips had disappeared. And Fudge, from his chair, pronounced the sentence. 2 years. The chains tightened. The gallery murmured. Harry sat in the centre of it all and felt the world shift beneath him and thought, this is what betrayal feels like. Not the dramatic kind. The institutional kind. The kind that comes not from enemies, but from the people who are supposed to protect you. The night before transportation to Azkaban, Harry was held in a ministry cell. The cell was clean. Functional, not like Azkaban. There were no Dementors here, no whispers, no cold, just a room with a bed and a door and a window that looked out onto a corridor where an Auror stood guard. The Auror's name was Tonks. She was not supposed to be there. Her shift had ended 3 hours ago, but she was there anyway. Because Nymphadora Tonks had joined the Order of the Phoenix to fight injustice, and the injustice of incarcerating a 15-year-old boy for saving his cousin's life was the kind of thing she could not walk away from. "Watcher, Harry," she said through the door. "Hey, Tonks, Dumbledore's filing an appeal. I know. Hermione's already written the brief. 14 inches. Cross-referenced. That sounds about right. Are you okay?" Harry considered the question. He was not okay. He was 15, wandless, in a cell, about to be transported to the worst prison in the wizarding world. He was not okay by any reasonable definition of the word. "No," he said. "But I will be." "How do you know?" "Because I've been in bad situations before. This isn't even the worst one. The worst one was the graveyard. This seems pretty bad. The graveyard had Voldemort. This just has Cornelius Fudge. And Cornelius Fudge, whatever else you can say about him, is not Voldemort. That's a low bar. It's the bar I have." Tonks was through the door. Harry could hear her shifting her weight, the creak of her boots on the stone floor. "I'm sorry," she said. "For what it's worth. I'm sorry that this happened, and I'm sorry that I couldn't stop it, and I'm sorry that the system I work for is broken. It's not your fault. I know. But someone should say it. Someone in this building should tell you that what happened today was wrong, that you didn't deserve it, that the people who did this to you should be ashamed. Are they? Ashamed? Some of them. The ones who are capable of shame. Fudge isn't capable, he's too far gone, too invested in his own version of reality. But some of the Wizengamot members who voted I've seen their faces. They know what they did. Knowing and acting are different things. Yeah, they are. That's the gap between knowing and acting. The gap where injustice lives. Harry pressed his hand against the door. Not for warmth. For contact. For the knowledge that another human being was on the other side. A person who disagreed with what was happening and who was saying so. "Thank you, Tonks. Don't thank me. I didn't do anything. You're here. That's something. It's not enough. It's something." Tonks left at midnight. Harry lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling and did not sleep. Tomorrow he would be taken to Azkaban. Tomorrow the cell would be smaller and colder, and the ceiling would be stone instead of plaster, and the door would be iron instead of wood, and the guard would not be Tonks, who was kind, but Tomorrow he closed his eyes, thought about Ron and Hermione and Sirius and Dumbledore, thought about the Patronus, the Silver Stag, the light in the darkness, thought about his mother. "I'll be okay," he said. To the ceiling. To the dark. To the woman who had died protecting him and whose protection had saved him once and might, if the world was fair, save him again. The world was not fair. But the protection was real. The love was real. And reality, unlike fairness, cannot be voted away by 50 people in plum-coloured robes. We have told you about the arrival, about the cell, about the Dementors and the anger and the wall. Now let us tell you about the silence. Silence is the primary experience of Azkaban. Not the Dementors, though they are constant. Not the cold, though it is pervasive. The silence. The absolute, devastating, soul-crushing absence of human contact that is in many ways worse than any magical torment. Harry spoke to no one for the first 14 days. The guards did not speak to prisoners. The other prisoners, the ones in adjacent cells, the ones whose voices Harry could sometimes hear through the walls, did not. The Dementors did not speak at all, though they communicated in their way through the cold and the pressure and the whispered implications that seeped through the walls like damp. 14 days of silence. Harry discovered things about himself in those 14 days that he had never known. He discovered that he talked to himself. Not in the way that most people talk to themselves, the running commentary that accompanies daily life. He talked to himself out loud. In the cell. In the dark. Having conversations with people who were not. He talked to Ron. "You'd hate this food. The porridge is worse than the Hogwarts porridge, and you always said the Hogwarts porridge was the worst thing about the castle." He talked to Hermione. "There's nothing to read. You'd go mental in about 3 hours. I've been here for 2 weeks and I've already memorized the pattern of cracks in the ceiling. There are 17. He talked to his mother. "I'm okay, Mum. I know you can't hear me. But I'm okay. I'm doing what you did. I'm holding on. I'm not letting go." He talked to Dumbledore. "I trusted you. I trusted the system you told me to trust. The system that was supposed to be different from the Muggles. The system that was supposed to see me and understand me and protect me. And it put me in a box. Another box. A different box. But a box." He talked to Voldemort. "You must be loving this. Your greatest enemy, the boy who survived, locked in a cell by his own people. You didn't even have to do it yourself. They did it for you. The conversations were not comforting. They were not therapeutic. They were survival. The human mind requires stimulation language, interaction, the give and take of conversation that keeps the cognitive machinery running. Without it, the mind begins to deteriorate. The Dementors accelerated this deterioration, feeding on the isolation, amplifying the silence, pushing the prisoner toward the grey, featureless despair that was their preferred feeding ground. Harry's conversations kept the machinery running, kept his mind sharp, kept the identity the essential Harry Potter, the boy who argued and questioned and refused to accept the world as it was presented to him alive. On the 15th day he received the first letter, Hermione's handwriting, Ron's postscript, the words "You are not alone." And Harry, sitting in his cell holding the letter, felt the silence break. The months passed. Let us tell you about what happened outside the walls. Through every available channel, legal, political, diplomatic, he wrote letters. He visited ministry officials. He gave interviews to the Quibbler, the only publication that would print his statements. Because the Prophet was under Fudge's control, and Fudge had decided that any mention of Harry Potter's innocence was an attack. Hermione researched. She had, by October, compiled a legal brief so comprehensive that it was later used as a textbook at the Ministry's Department of Magical Law Enforcement, a brief that documented every precedent, every ruling, every historical case in which underage magic performed in self-defense had been acquitted. She filed motions, appeals, requests for review. Each one was denied. Each denial was documented. Each documentation was filed with the next appeal. The wall of paper grew and grew and grew. Ron organized. This was the thing that surprised everyone, including Ron himself, the discovery that Ronald Weasley, who had never organized anything in his life more complex than a game of exploding snap, was capable of organizing a resistance movement with the efficiency of a military commander. He started with the Dar, contacted every member, explained the situation, asked for help. Help came. Not in the form Harry might have expected, not wand-waving heroics or dramatic rescue attempts. In the form of letters. Hundreds of them, written by students, addressed to the Wizengamot, demanding Harry's release, written by parents, addressed to the ministry, protests written by ordinary witches and wizards, addressed to the prophet, calling the sentence unjust. Fred and George Weasley printed pamphlets, free Harry Potter in letters that changed colour and occasionally exploded in a shower of sparks. They distributed them in Diagon Alley, in Hogsmeade, in the ministry atrium itself, slipping them into the pockets of ministry employees who found them hours later and read them and felt, in some cases, the first stirring of doubt. The twins were arrested twice, fined 3 times, banned from the ministry grounds. They considered this a personal achievement and printed. Neville Longbottom wrote to his grandmother. Augusta Longbottom, whose son and daughter-in-law had been tortured into insanity by Death Eaters that the ministry had failed to stop, read her grandson's letter and felt something rekindle in her chest that had been dormant for 14 years. She visited the ministry, walked into Fudge's office unannounced. Augusta Longbottom did not make appointments. Appointments were for people who could be ignored, and told the Minister for Magic, in terms that were precise and devastating, exactly what she thought of his decision to imprison a child for defending himself against dark creatures. My Frank and Alice are innocent. Mungo's because the ministry failed to protect them, Augusta said. Now you have put a boy in Azkaban for protecting himself when the ministry's failures created the very threat he was defending against. If you have any sense at all, Minister, you will release that boy before the wizarding world discovers what kind of man you truly are. Fudge did not release him, but Augusta's visit was reported in the Quibbler, and the report was read by thousands, and thousands began to ask questions that Fudge could not answer without admitting things he was not prepared to admit. The pressure grew. Slowly, methodically, not a dramatic rescue, not a daring escape. Something more powerful, something more difficult. The truth, applied consistently, over time, by people who refused to stop telling it. And then the Dementors left. We have told you about this. About the February morning when the cold diminished. About the letter from Perkins. About the blue sky through the tiny window. But we have not told you about what happened next. About the day Harry walked out of the cell and onto the dock and into the boat. Kingsley Shacklebolt was waiting. Behind him, on the dock, stood Dumbledore. Harry had not seen Dumbledore in 7 months. The old man looked older. The blue eyes were still bright, but the face around them had aged in a way that suggested the intervening months had been fought, hour by hour, against an opponent that did not tire. Harry, Dumbledore said. Harry stood on the dock. The wind was cold. The sun was bright. He was thin 30 pounds lighter than when he entered, his robes hanging from his frame like curtains from a rail. His face was sharp, the cheekbones visible, the eyes deeper in their sockets. The scar on his forehead, which had always been faded, was vivid bright red, as if the months of proximity to Dementors had inflamed it, awakened it. Professor, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him, at the boy he had placed in the care of the system, at the boy the system had destroyed and who had rebuilt himself from the wreckage. "I am sorry," Dumbledore said. "I failed you. You fought for me. Not hard enough. Not fast enough. I trusted the institutions. I believed that the law would protect you. I was wrong. You were right to trust the law. The law was right. The people enforcing it were wrong. That is a distinction without a difference to the person in the cell." "Yes," Harry said. "It is." They stood on the dock. The sea was grey. The fortress was behind them. The boat was waiting. "I will not fail you again," Dumbledore said. Harry looked at the old man, at the greatest wizard, at the man who had spent decades building a network of protection and influence and strategic positioning, all designed to keep one boy alive long enough to fulfill a prophecy. "I believe you," Harry said, "but I'm going to make sure of it myself." He got in the boat. He did not look back. The return to Grimmauld Place was not the triumph that the Order had hoped. Harry walked through the door at 3 p.m. on March 5th. The kitchen was full Ron, Hermione, the Weasleys, Sirius, Lupin, Tonks, Moody. Half the Order crowded into the basement kitchen of a house that was designed for 2 people and was currently housing approximately 15. They were waiting for him. Molly had cooked enough food for the table was set with the good dishes, or what passed for good dishes at Grimmauld Place, which meant plates that were merely chipped rather than cracked. The fire was burning. The house was warm. Harry walked in. The room fell silent. Not the happy, anticipatory silence of people waiting to surprise someone. The shocked, gutted silence of people seeing something they were not, because the Harry who walked into the kitchen was not the Harry who had left. The physical changes were obvious, the weight loss, the pallor, the way his robes hung on his frame, but the physical changes were the least. It was his eyes. The eyes were the same colour. Green, bright, unmistakable, but the thing behind the eyes, the quality, the tone, the particular frequency of Harry-ness that radiated from them had shifted. The eyes of the Harry who had left for Azkaban 7 months ago were the eyes of a boy who trusted the world despite its failures, who believed in the fundamental fairness of things despite abundant evidence to the contrary. The eyes of a Gryffindor, bright and fierce and impossibly stubbornly naive. The eyes that walked into the kitchen were not naive. They were clear. They were sharp. They assessed the room, the exits, the inhabitants, the positions, the sight lines in under 3 seconds. It was a reflex, a habit formed in a place where assessment was the difference between surviving the day and not. Molly burst into tears. "Oh." Harry, she crossed the room and pulled him into a hug that was not gentle, that was the hug of a woman who had spent 7 months imagining the worst, and who needed physical proof that the worst had not happened. Harry stood in the hug, let himself be held, did not pull away, but did not relax either. His body was rigid, tense, the body of someone who had not been touched by another human being in 7 months, and who needed to relearn the difference between contact and threat. "I'm fine, Mrs. Weasley. You are not fine. You are skin and bones. You are going to sit down and eat everything on this table, and you are not getting up until I say so." Harry sat. Ate. The food was good, better than good. It was Molly's cooking, which was love expressed as shepherd's pie and treacle tart, and the taste of it after 7 months of grey paste and porridge was so overwhelming that Harry had to stop after the 3rd bite and press his hands against the table and breathe. "Take your time," Lupin said, quietly, from across the table. Lupin, who understood, who had been an outcast for his entire life, who knew what it was like to be punished for something you could not control. "I'm fine," Harry said. "The food is just a lot. It will be. For a while. Everything will be a lot. Noise, light, people. Your senses have been running on minimum for 7 months. They need time to recalibrate. How do you know? Because I talked to Sirius, and Sirius has described what the readjustment is like. Harry looked at Sirius, who was standing by the fireplace, leaning against the man, watching Harry with the particular attention of a man cataloguing damage. It takes about a month, Sirius said. The physical stuff, the appetite, the sleep, the sensitivity to light and sound, that takes a month. The other stuff takes longer. What other stuff? The dreams, the flinching, the way you'll wake up at night and not know where you are and reach for a wand that isn't there, the way you'll walk into a room and assess it for threats before you say hello, the way you'll feel cold, even when you're not cold, because the cold of that place is inside you and it takes time to warm up. How long? Different for everyone. For me, some of it's still there. 12 years later. That's comforting. I've found that honesty about the hard things is more useful than comfort about the easy things. Harry ate. The kitchen buzzed with conversation that was deliberately like Quidditch scores, ministry gossip, the twins' latest inventions, and underneath the lightness, the heaviness of what was unsaid, the fear, the guilt, the awareness that every person in this room had failed to prevent what had happened to Harry, and that the failure was collective and ongoing and not yet resolved. Ron sat beside Harry, close shoulder to shoulder, not speaking, just being there, being the physical fact of a friend, occupying space, radiating the particular warmth that Ron radiated when he was not trying to be anything other than what he was: a loyal, steady, stubborn person, had not wavered, had not accepted for a single moment that his best friend's story was over. Hermione sat on Harry's other side. She had a folder. Of course she had a folder. The folder contained her notes on the appeal, the legal analysis, the precedent research, the 17 motions she had filed, the responses she had received, the documentation of every step in the process that had, eventually, led to Harry's release. She did not open the folder. She did not discuss the legal process. She sat beside Harry and ate her shepherd's pie and did not talk about Azkaban, because Hermione's intelligence extended to emotional intelligence, and her emotional intelligence told her that the last thing Harry needed right now was an analysis of the system that had destroyed him. What he needed was shepherd's pie and silence, and the warmth of two people sitting on either side of him. She provided all three. The nightmares began on the second night. Harry woke at 3 a.m. in the bedroom at Grimmauld Place that he shared with Ron. He woke the way you wake from Azkaban dreams, silently, completely, with his hands already gripping the mattress and his body already rigid. No scream, no sound. The sound had been trained out of him by 7 months in a cell where any sound attracted the Dementors. He was in the cell. He was always in the cell. The ceiling was stone. The shelf was cold. The bucket was in the corner. The Dementors were outside the door, pressing Harry. Ron's voice. Close, real, Harry blinked. The cell dissolved. The bedroom assembled around him, the walls, the curtains, the wardrobe, the second bed where Ron was sitting up, his red hair sticking in every direction, his face creased with sleep and concern. You okay? Harry's hands were shaking. He clasped them together. Fine, you were shaking. The whole bed was shaking. Bad dream. Ron was quiet for a moment. Then he did something that was very Ron and very right. He got out of his bed, crossed the room, and sat on the edge of Harry's bed. Not speaking, not asking questions, just sitting. I don't need shut up. I'm sitting here. Ron, I said shut up. You're my best mate and you had a nightmare and I'm sitting here and you can either talk about it or not talk about it, but I am not going back to my bed. Harry looked at Ron. At the freckled face, the messy hair, the absolute uncompromising refusal to leave. The cell, Harry said. I was back in the cell. You're not in the cell. You're at Grimmauld Place. You're in a bedroom. I'm here. Hermione's down the hall. Sirius is downstairs being dramatic about something, probably. Harry almost laughed. The almost was progress. It felt real, Harry said. It wasn't. This is real. I'm real. This incredibly lumpy mattress is real. The sound of creature muttering in the walls is real. That's all real. How do you know? Because if this were a dream, the Cannons would have won the league. And they haven't. So it's definitely reality. Harry did laugh. Small, broken, but real. Thanks, Ron, don't mention it. Now go back to sleep. We've got a war to win. Not tonight? No, not tonight. Tonight we sleep. Tomorrow we win the war. That's very optimistic. I'm a Weasley. We're clinically optimistic. It's a medical condition. Ron stayed on the edge of the bed until Harry's breathing slowed and his hands unclenched and the shaking stopped. Then, Ron went back to his own bed and did not sleep, because he was listening. And he would listen every night for the next 3 months, and every time Harry woke shaking, Ron would be there, sitting on the edge of the bed. The months between Harry's release and the battle at the Ministry were spent in preparation. Not just military preparation, though that was part of it the Dar resumed. The Order intensified its operations. The intelligence network that Snape had built continued to provide information that was invaluable and terrifying in equal measure. The preparation, internal, the work of rebuilding a human being who had been taken apart by 7 months in the worst place on earth. Harry trained. Obsessively, relentlessly, the room of requirement became his headquarters. He spent hours there each day, practicing spells he had read about in his cell, developing techniques he had conceived in the silence, pushing his magic further and harder than he had ever pushed it before. The Patronus was the first thing. He cast it on the 3rd day back at Hogwarts, alone in the room of requirement, with the door sealed and the room configured as a blank space. Just Harry and his wand and the memories behind the wall. Expecto Patronum. The stag materialized. But it was different. Larger than before. Brighter. The silver light was sharper, and the stag moved with a power and purpose that Harry had not seen in his previous castings. It had changed because he had changed. The Patronus reflected the caster, and the caster had been through the fire, and what came out of the fire was harder and brighter and more alive than what went in. He showed Lupin. Lupin watched the stag canter through the room of requirement, and his eyes widened. "That's extraordinary," Lupin said. "The intensity. The definition. Harry, that Patronus could drive back 50 Dementors. It drove back 0 Dementors in Azkaban. Because I didn't have a wand. And now you do. And now I do." The implication hung in the air. Harry Potter, with a wand in his hand, with 7 months of rage and clarity and survival behind him, with a Patronus that blazed like a sun. Harry Potter was not the boy who had been chained to a chair in courtroom 10. He was something else. Something that the Ministry should have been afraid of, and that Voldemort should have been afraid of, and that in the months to come they both would be. Dumbledore's army trained 3 times a week. Harry taught with a precision and intensity that unsettled some of the younger students and inspired all of them. Voldemort does not play fair, Harry told the assembled Dar in the room of requirement at the beginning of a session in April. He does not follow rules. He does not respect conventions. He uses the killing curse the way most people use Lumos, casually, efficiently, without hesitation. If you fight him or his followers, you must understand that the fight will not be fair, will not be pleasant, and will not end with a handshake. "Then how do we win?" asked Colin Creevey from the front row. "By being better, not more powerful. Better, more prepared, more disciplined, more willing to do what needs to be done." What needs to be done? Whatever it takes to protect the people you love. That is the only rule that matters. He taught them shield charms, stunning spells, disarming hexes. He taught them to fight in pairs, in groups, in formation. He taught them to move through corridors and rooms and open spaces with awareness and purpose. He taught them the things that 7 months in a cell had taught him, that survival is not glamorous, that the people who survive are not always the strongest, but are always the most adaptable, that the willingness to endure is more valuable than the ability to triumph. And he taught them about the Patronus charm is the only defense against a Dementor, Harry said. It requires a happy memory, a real one, not a fantasy, not a wish, not an idealized version of something that never happened, a real memory of real happiness. What if you don't have one? Asked a third-year Hufflepuff, whose name was Hannah Abbott, and whose face suggested that the question was not hypothetical. Harry looked at her, at the earnest, frightened, determined face. Everyone has one, he said. Sometimes you have to look hard. Sometimes it's small. Sometimes it's just a moment, a laugh, a meal, a hand on your shoulder. But everyone has one. The Dementors want you to believe you don't. That's the lie they tell. That there is nothing good in you. That the darkness is all there is. And it's not? No, it's not. I spent 7 months surrounded by Dementors, and they couldn't take my happy memories. Not because I'm special. Because the memories were real. And real things, real love, real friendship, real kindness are stronger than anything the darkness can produce. The room was very quiet. 30 students, ranging from 3rd years to 7th years, looking at a boy who had been to the worst place in the world and had come back with something that the worst place could not destroy. Now, Harry said, one's up. Let's practice. The world broke open in June. Voldemort's attack on the Ministry was the beginning of the end of the illusion, the collective, desperate, institutionally maintained illusion that everything was fine, that the Dark Lord had not returned, that a 15-year-old boy had lied about a graveyard and deserved 2 years in prison for his trouble. The illusion died in the atrium of the Ministry of Magic, where Voldemort appeared in person, in front of dozens of Ministry employees and the Minister himself, and duelled Albus Dumbledore while the fountain of magical brethren exploded around them. Fudge saw. The Ministry saw. The world saw. And the world, which had spent a year believing a comfortable lie, was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. Harry Potter had been right. About everything. About the graveyard, about Voldemort, about the Dementors, about all of it. The boy they had put in prison had been telling the truth. Fudge was removed. Bones became minister. The political landscape shifted overnight, and the people who had voted to convict Harry, the 50 Wizengamot members, the Ministry officials, the Prophet editors found themselves on the wrong side of a truth they had spent a year denying. Some apologized. Most did not. The gap between knowing and acting, the gap where injustice lives, swallowed their guilt and produced silence. Harry was offered a formal apology by the new minister. Amelia Bones came to Hogwarts personally, sat across from Harry in McGonagall's office, and said the words that the institution she now led should have said a year ago. On behalf of the Ministry of Magic, I apologize. What was done to you was wrong. The conviction was unjust, the sentence was cruel, and the failure of the Ministry to protect your child from the political machinations of a minister who valued his own power over the safety of the wizarding world was a failure of the highest order. Harry looked at her, at the monocle, at the square jaw, at the face of a woman who was, he believed, genuinely sorry. Thank you, Minister, that's not enough. No, it's not. What would be enough? Reform. Real reform. Not the kind that gets announced in the Prophet and forgotten in 6 months. The kind that changes the structure. The Wizengamot should not be able to convict a child without independent review. Azkaban should not use Dementors. The fact that they defected proves they were never, and no minister should ever again have the power to use the justice system as a political weapon. Bones looked at him. at the 15-year-old boy who was making policy proposals with the precision and clarity of someone 3 times his age. You've thought about this. I had 6 months with nothing to do but think and reading between the lines. You're telling me that the system that failed you needs to be torn down and rebuilt. I'm telling you that the system that failed me will fail others if it isn't changed. I'm not the last person who will be inconvenient to the ministry. I'm not the last person who will say something that the people in power don't want to hear. And if the system allows inconvenient people to be imprisoned then the system is not a justice system. It's a control system. And control systems protect the controllers, not the people they claim to serve. Bones was quiet for a long time. McGonagall, standing behind Harry, had an expression on her face that was not easily described, but that contained, among other things, the fierce satisfaction of a teacher watching a student exceed expectations in ways that the teacher had not imagined possible. "I will implement reforms," Bones said. "It will take time. Time is the one thing I've learned to wait for. You've learned patience. I've learned that patience and determination are the same thing viewed from different angles. Patience is determination that doesn't fidget." Bones almost smiled. "You remind me of your mother. I've been told. She was formidable. So am I." "Yes, I can see that." Bones left. Harry sat in the office. McGonagall put her hand on his shoulder, a gesture so unprecedented that Harry nearly fell out of his chair. "Well said, Potter. Thank you, Professor. I mean it. Every word of that was correct. The system failed you, and you have the right, the obligation to demand that it be changed. Will it change? Slowly, painfully, with resistance from people who benefit from the current structure. But yes, it will change. Because people like you demand it, and because the alternative where truth-tellers are imprisoned and Dark Lords are denied is too terrible to sustain. The alternative happened, Professor. It happened to me. I know, and it will not happen again. I will make sure of it." "How?" McGonagall straightened her spectacles, adjusted her hat, looked at Harry with an expression that combined Scottish stubbornness, academic rigour, and the particular fury of a woman who had watched her student be taken to prison and had been unable to prevent it. By being the kind of teacher who does not sit quietly when her students are in danger, by raising children who recognise injustice and fight it, by refusing, absolutely and unconditionally, to participate in a system that punishes courage. That sounds like Gryffindor. It is Gryffindor. It is the best of Gryffindor. The part that most people forget, that Gryffindor is not just about facing dragons and fighting Dark Lords. It is about standing in a courtroom when the vote goes against you and saying it is about writing letters to a boy in prison because the letters are the only light that reaches him. It is about refusing to go to bed because your friend is in danger. Harry looked at his head of house, at the woman who had been his teacher for 5 years and who he was only now, after Azkaban, beginning to truly understand. "Thank you, Professor, for everything." "Don't thank me, Potter. Just keep being the person you are." "Which person? The one before Azkaban or the one after?" "Both. They are both you. The difference is that now you know it." Harry did not seek apologies from the individual Wizengamot members. He did not seek revenge. He did not stand on the steps of the ministry and declare vindication. He went back to Hogwarts, went to his classes, trained the Dark, ate meals in the Great Hall and played chess with Ron in the common room and studied in the library with Hermione and did the ordinary, unremarkable things that constituted a life at Hogwarts, because ordinary things were, he had learned, the most extraordinary things in the world. Ordinary was warmth. Ordinary was light. Ordinary was a friend sitting on the edge of your bed at 3 a.m. Harry treasured ordinary. He would never take it for granted again. Snape's behaviour after Harry's return was, to everyone who noticed, the most unexpected development of the year. The change was not dramatic. Snape did not suddenly become warm or kind or the sort of teacher who gave encouraging feedback and put gold stars on essays. He was still Snape acerbic, demanding, impatient, capable of reducing a first year to tears with a single raised eyebrow. But with Harry, something shifted. The first potions class after Harry's return, Snape assigned a potion that was 2 years above the 5th year curriculum. The Draught of the Awakened Mind, a complex temperamental brew that required 12 ingredients in precise sequence, and that most Newt students... "This potion is not on your syllabus," Snape said to the class. "It is on mine. You will attempt it. Most of you will fail. That is expected." Harry began brewing. His hands were steadier than before Azkaban, because 7 months of forced stillness had given him a physical control that he had not previously possessed. He added the ingredients, stirred, waited, added more. Snape paused at Harry's cauldron, looked at the potion, which was the correct shade of indigo, the correct consistency, the correct temperature. "Acceptable," Snape said. He moved on. But as he passed, so close that only Harry could hear, he said something else. 2 words, barely a whisper. "Welcome back." Harry's hands stopped, just for a moment. Then he continued stirring. He did not tell anyone, but he carried those words the way he had carried Hermione's letter in the cell pressed against the place where the warmth lived. The relationship between Harry and Snape evolved in ways that neither of them would have predicted, and that neither of them ever fully discussed. Snape had voted for Harry's conviction. He was a member of the Wizengamot, or had been, before Dumbledore had removed him from the panel in protest. He had not wanted to vote for it. He had been pressured, coerced, threatened with the exposure of his double agent status if he dissented. Harry did not know this, would not know it until the Pensieve years later, when Snape's memories revealed the full scope of the compromises the man had made to maintain his cover. But Harry sensed something. The particular quality of Snape's attention, the way he watched Harry in the corridors, the way he assigned extra credit work that was clearly designed to test Harry's capabilities rather than his patience, the way he deducted points from Gryffindor with a mechanical regularity that seemed, if you looked closely, almost protective. As if the public performance of hostility was cover for a private concern that Snape could not express any other way. "Snape's been weird since I got back," Harry told Hermione, in the library in November. "Weird how? Less hostile. More watchful, like he's keeping an eye on me. He's always kept an eye on you. This is different. Before Azkaban, he kept an eye on me like he was looking for a reason to give me detention. Now he keeps an eye on me like he's looking for signs that I'm about to break." "Are you? Am I what?" "About to break." Harry considered this. "No, but I think the fact that he's watching for it means he knows what Azkaban does. He's seen it before. In the Death Eaters. In the people who served Voldemort and were sent to prison and came back damaged. He's worried about you. Snape doesn't worry. Snape calculates risk. Those are the same thing. Worry is just risk calculation with emotion attached." Harry looked at Hermione, at the face that processed information faster than any face he had ever known, that cycled through analysis and empathy and determination with the speed of a Muggle computer. "When did you get so wise?" he asked. "I've always been wise. You just weren't in a position to appreciate it. I was in prison. That does tend to limit one's appreciation of other people's wisdom. Yes, Ginny Weasley was the person who understood Harry's return best, and she understood it in a way that was different from Ron's loyalty or Hermione's analysis or Sirius's solidarity of shared experience. She understood it because she knew what it was like to have something dark inside your head. The diary. Tom Riddle's diary, which had possessed her in her first year, which had taken her mind and used it, and left marks on her consciousness that were invisible but permanent. She knew what it felt like to have your thoughts invaded, to lose control of your own interior landscape, to fight for territory inside your own skull. The dreams will get better, Ginny told Harry one evening in the common room, sitting beside him on the sofa, close enough that their shoulders touched. Not speaking loudly, not making a production of it, just saying the thing that needed to be said with the quiet confidence of someone who had been through the fire. How do you know? Because mine got better after the diary, after Riddle. It took 2 years, and some nights are still bad, but it gets better. What helped? Time, and talking, and being angry, really angry. Not the performative kind, the real kind. The kind that comes from understanding that someone took something from you and that you have the right to be furious about it. I'm angry. I know, I can see it. It's in the way you hold your wand, the way you walk into a room, the way you look at the Wizengamot members who voted against you when they come to Hogwarts for inspections. I don't, you do. You memorize their faces. You track them across the room. You assess them the way soldiers assess enemy combatants. I've seen it. That's paranoia. That's survival. And there's nothing wrong with it. The thing about going through something terrible is that it rewrites your nervous system. Your body learns to watch for threats, and it keeps watching even after the threats are gone. That's not weakness. That's adaptation. The question is whether the adaptation serves you or controls you, and which is mine. Ginny looked at him. Red hair, brown eyes, the fierce certainty of a woman who would, in the years to come, become the most important person in Harry's life, not because she rescued him, but because she stood beside him without needing him to be rescued. Right now, it's serving you. You're sharper, you're more aware. You're better prepared for what's coming. But when the war is over, when Voldemort is gone and the fighting is done, you're going to have to learn to turn it off. And that part is going to be harder than the fighting. You sound like you've given this a lot of thought. I have. I've been thinking about you for 7 months. 7 months? Since the day they took you, I've been thinking about what you were going through and what it was doing to you, and what you would need when you came back. Because I knew you would come back. I never doubted it. Why? Because you're Harry Potter. And Harry Potter always comes back. He leaned against his shoulder. He let her. The common room was warm. The fire was burning. Outside the window, the grounds of Hogwarts were dark and cold and full of the kind of beauty that exists only in the space between danger and safety. Ginny? Yes? Thank you. For what? For thinking about me. For 7 months. Always, she said the word casually. The way you say words that are true without needing to be explained. And Harry heard it, and felt something crack in the hard shell that Azkaban had built around him. Not a collapse, not a weakness, but a door. A way in. A space where warmth could enter, and the cold could leave, and the person he had been before the cell could begin. Slowly, to rejoin the person he had become. The Horcrux hunt consumed the next year and a half. Harry, Ron, and Hermione moved through the wizarding world like ghosts, visible when necessary, invisible when possible. The locket, the cup, the diadem. Each one a battle, each one a test of the bond between them. The locket was the worst. It hung around their necks in rotation, whispering to each of them, finding the cracks in their armour and pressing against them with the patient, insistent malice of a thing that had spent decades learning how to destroy human beings from the inside. To Ron, it whispered about inadequacy, about being the least important, the least talented, the one who was there by default rather than destiny. To Hermione, it whispered about the futility of knowledge in the face of power, about the 17 motions she had filed that had done nothing, the legal briefs that had changed nothing, the brilliance that had saved no one. To Harry, it whispered about the cell. Remember the cold. Remember the dark. Remember the stone shelf and the bucket and the scratches on the wall. Remember the way the Dementors pressed against the door. Remember the silence. Remember being alone. Remember that no one came. Remember that the people who said they loved you left you there for 6 months. Remember that the system you trusted put you in a box. The locket was more effective against Harry than against the others, because the things it whispered were not lies. The cell, the cold, had been real. The 6 months had been real. The locket did not need to fabricate it, simply took Harry's worst memories and amplified them, turned the volume up, played them on repeat until the memories were louder than reality. Harry fought it. Not with the anger that had sustained him in Azkaban that fire had been useful there, but here, in the tent, in the forest, the fire was dangerous. The locket fed on anger the way the Dementors fed on despair. It was a different kind of darkness, requiring a different kind of defense. Harry fought with the letters. He carried them. All of them. Every letter Hermione had written, every postscript Ron had scrawled, every note Perkins had smuggled through the slot. He carried them in the inside pocket of his jacket, a stack of parchment that was worn soft from handling and that smelled faintly of the cell and faintly of biscuits and faintly of the particular combination of ink and determination that was Hermione's writing. When the locket whispered, Harry read the letters. You are not alone. We are coming. We love you. The words were simple. The magic behind. Ron left once. We have told you about this, about the tent and the cold and the things the locket said. But we have not told you about the hour after Ron left, the hour that Harry and Hermione sat in the tent in silence and did not look at each other, and did not speak about the void that Ron's departure had created. The void was familiar to Harry. He knew what it felt like to lose someone. He had lost Cedric. He had lost Sirius temporarily, then permanently, then temporarily again, in the complicated cycle of Sirius's absence and presence that had defined their relationship. He had lost 6 months of his life to a cell. But losing Ron was different, because Ron's loss was voluntary. Ron had chosen to leave. And the deliberate decision to walk away was the thing that hurt most, because Harry had been left before by systems and institutions and governments, but he had never been left by a friend. Hermione cried. Harry did not. He'll come back, Hermione said. How do you know? Because he's Ron. What does that mean? It means he's the person who sat on the edge of your bed every night for 3 months after Azkaban. It means he's the person who refused to go to bed when you were arrested. It means he's the person who organised a resistance movement because his best friend was in prison. Ron Weasley does not leave. He goes away sometimes, but he does not leave. There's a difference? Yes, going away is temporary, leaving is permanent. And Ron is constitutionally incapable of permanence in any direction that is not toward you. Harry looked at Hermione, at the bushy hair and the tired eyes and the fierce, unwavering certainty that had carried them both through the last 6 months and would carry them through the next. When did you become the optimist? When you became the realist. Someone has to balance the scales. Ron came back. With the sword of Gryffindor, with the courage to face the locket's worst lies and destroy them, with an apology that was not eloquent, but was real. I'm sorry. I know. I wasn't going to leave. Not permanently. I know that too. How? Because Hermione told me. She said you're constitutionally incapable of permanence in any direction that is not toward me. Ron looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at the ceiling. She said that? She did. That's surprisingly poetic for Hermione. "I have hidden depths," Hermione said to the ceiling. Apparently, they stood in the dark. The forest was cold, the wall, and the three of them were together again. The way they had been together since the first year, since the troll, since the chess game, since the beginning, three people who had chosen each other and who kept choosing each other day after day, despite everything that happened between the choices. The Battle of Hogwarts began at midnight and ended at dawn. Harry fought differently than anyone, not with the reckless Gryffindor charge that had defined his earlier battles, the headlong rush into danger, the improvised heroics, the reliance on luck and instinct, and the particular brand of divine protection that seemed to follow him everywhere. He fought like a soldier, with tactics and discipline and the clear-eyed assessment that Azkaban. He directed the Dar through the corridors of Hogwarts with commands that were precise and effective. He positioned fighters at choke points. He organized rotations to prevent exhaustion. He managed the battle the way a general manages a campaign, not from the rear but from the front, leading by example, fighting alongside the people he had trained. Neville Longbottom was everywhere. In the corridors, on the stairs, in the entrance hall, casting spells with a ferocity and precision that no one who had known the clumsy, forgetful boy of first year would have recognized. Neville had changed not because of Azkaban, which had happened to Harry, but because of the Da, which had happened to all of them. Harry's training had given Neville something he had never had, the belief that he was capable. Neville. Harry shouted across the entrance hall over the crash of spells and the screaming of the wounded. "Take the second floor. Hold the corridor." Neville did not hesitate, did not question, turned and ran, and behind him ran a squad of DA members, 5th years, 6th years, children who had been taught to fight by a boy, who had been taught to survive by a cell, and they held the corridor. Against Death Eaters, against adults with 20 years of experience and the Dark Lord's blessing, they held. Luna Lovegood fought with the dreamy, unfocused attention that was her defining characteristic, casting spells that seemed random but were, on closer inspection, precisely targeted. She stunned a Death Eater who was about to hex Ginny. She shielded a group of 3rd years who had been cornered in a classroom. She walked through the battle as if it were a nature walk, commenting on the quality of the spell work around her with the critical eye of someone reviewing a particularly interesting academic paper. "That was a rather elegant shield charm," Luna said to Harry, passing him in the corridor while dodging a killing curse. "Did you learn it in prison?" "Yes, Luna, I learned it in prison. I thought so. It has a certain quality, a hardness, like diamond." "Thank you." "You're welcome." "Duck." Harry ducked. A curse sailed over his head and hit the wall behind him, leaving a crater the size of a dinner plate. "Thank you, Luna. Always happy to help." Fred Weasley died in the explosion. Harry was 3 corridors away. He heard the blast, felt the castle shudder, and knew with the instinct of a soldier who has learned to read the sound of destruction that something irreversible had happened. He found them afterward. George, kneeling, Ron, standing behind him, his face destroyed. Fred, lying in the rubble, laughing. The last expression on Fred Weasley's face was a smile. The last sound he had made was a joke that no one would ever know the punchline to. Harry stood in the corridor and looked at the body and felt something crack in the shell that Azkaban had built. Not the whole shell. The piece that said, "Don't feel too much. Don't care too much. Don't love too much. Because love is the vulnerability that the world uses to hurt you." Fred was dead because the world was at war. The war was happening because Voldemort existed. Voldemort existed because the wizarding world had failed, and the wizarding world had failed to stop him because it had spent a year pretending he didn't exist and imprisoning the boy who told them the truth. The chain of causation led, inevitably, back to the courtroom, back to the 50 raised hands, back to the chains on the chair. Harry looked at Fred's body and thought, this is what happens when institutions choose comfort over truth. People die. Good people. People who were laughing when the wall came down. He did not cry. Not yet. There was still a battle to fight. He turned, walked toward the forest. He thought about the cell. About cell 417. 4th floor. North wing. 6 feet by 8 feet, stone shelf. Bucket, window he thought about every day. Every scratch on the wall, every conversation with every moment of silence and cold and dark and the whispered lie of the Dementors. You are nothing. You are a boy in a box. And he thought, no. I am not a boy in a box. I am a person who has been in boxes and who has broken out of every single one. He walked into the clearing. Voldemort raised his wand. The green light came. Harry did not raise his wand. He opened his arms. He came back. He always came back. Harry Potter is dead, Voldemort announced to the Great Hall. Harry opened his eyes, rose to his feet, and the Great Hall erupted, because the boy who had survived the cupboard and the graveyard and the courtroom and the cell was standing again, alive, wand in hand, and the look on his face was not the look of a hero in a story. It was the look of someone who had been put in every box the world had to offer, and who had broken out of every single one. The Elder Wand arced through the air, and Harry Potter stood in the Great Hall of Hogwarts, surrounded by the living and the dead, and looked at the morning light coming through the shattered windows. Warmth. Real warmth. Not the memory of warmth, not the fading glow of a letter pressed against a chest in a dark cell. Real, physical, present warmth. Sunlight on his skin. In his eyes. He let it touch his face. And smiled. Years later, someone asked Harry Potter about Azkaban. He was at the Ministry. Older now. Calmer, the hardness that Azkaban had given him had been tempered by time and love and the slow, patient work of building a life that was not defined by survival but by something better. He was head aura. Married to Ginny. His desk was covered in paperwork, his office was messy, and there was a photograph on the wall, not a famous photograph, not an iconic image, just a picture of 3 people. A boy with red hair, a girl with bushy brown hair, and a boy with a scar, standing in front of a castle, laughing, a young aura, fresh from training, sitting across from. Asked the question that everyone wanted to ask and nobody had the courage to. Sir? What was it like? Azkaban? Harry was quiet for a moment. He looked at the photograph, at the laughing faces. Cold, he said. Very cold. The kind of cold that gets inside you and stays. Not in your bones, in your mind, in the place where you keep the things that make you yourself. How did you survive? I was angry. And then I was stubborn. And then I was just present. I was there, and I refused to not be there. Does that make sense? Not really, sir, Harry smiled. It will. If you're ever in a situation where the only thing you have left is yourself, you'll understand. The thing about boxes, cupboards, cells, whatever, is that they're designed to make you forget who you are. They're designed to reduce you, to make you small. And the trick, the only trick, is to refuse. To be too big for the box, to take up more space than they've given you, to be louder and angrier and more alive than the walls can contain. And you were? I was. Not because I'm special, not because I'm the boy who lived or the chosen one or whatever the prophet calls me this week, because I had people who wrote me letters, people who visited, people who filed 17 legal motions, people who refused to go to bed. He looked at the photograph again, at the 3 faces, at the castle behind them. That's the thing they don't tell you about Azkaban, Harry said. They tell you about the Dementors and the cold and the dark. They don't tell you that the thing that saves you isn't strength or courage or magic. It's the knowledge that someone, somewhere, is working to get you out, that someone loves you enough to smuggle a letter through a prison door. He picked up his quill, went back to his paperwork. Any other questions? The young aura shook her head, stood, walked to the door. Sir? Yes, thank you. For telling me. Harry nodded. The young aura left. The door closed. Harry sat at his desk, looked at the three laughing faces. Forever young, forever together, forever standing in front of a castle that had been, despite everything, home. And outside the window, the sun was shining, and the world was warm, and the boy who had been in every box the world could build was free. He had always been free. He just